first like to do is actually introduce Scott. Scott, do you want to sit on the side there? Is that the best spot? I guess that's probably your best spot. You look like this could be like a C-SPAN program. They sit on the side like that and everything. So I just want to introduce Scott Knowles. Scott actually is a faculty alum here from John Jay College. He actually taught here several years ago. Unfortunately, we didn't have a tenure track line available at the moment, and so he was given a wonderful opportunity to teach down at Drexel University down in Philadelphia. Scott's background actually is as a historian, and Scott's done a lot of work with the Reagan Hart Center, also with Sally individually. Has been here and given lectures on a variety of issues, but one of his probably his shining moments is a book that he wrote and published on disaster investigations called The Disaster Investigators, correct? That's the technical title, right? And so it looks at several different disasters over the years, including 9/11. And as a historian, Scott takes sort of that, to some extent, that 30,000-foot view of where we've been, where we're headed, and where we might be finding ourselves in the future. And so I want to welcome Scott back to John Jay. I wish he was still here, to tell you the truth. But one other thing, just as a side note, Scott actually, that many of you don't know, Scott, besides being a historian, also was a key individual in the city of Philadelphia, where Drexel is located, in working with the families of a building collapse that occurred June 2013 in a Salvation Army building. A building next door was under demolition. It fell. That building fell over onto the Salvation Army and killed 6 individuals, including the daughter of the city treasurer of the city of Philadelphia. And to make a long story short, Scott was the key person that the families, particularly the city treasurer Nancy Winkler, reached out to sort of get the ball rolling as far as looking at what happened that day particularly, but also sort of the larger, again, 30,000-foot view of the city of Philadelphia's code enforcement and all the issues that go along with that. And I can say I was very happy to have served with Scott on a commission that was formed in the aftermath of that disaster. So without further ado, Scott, take it over.
All right, just a couple of comments from me at this point, and I'll be chairing the last session. You'll hear a little bit more from me then. Thank you for the introduction. Glenn, I probably interviewed half the people in this room for my book, so the other half of you, be careful. You'll be scheduled for the next interview. But it's really, I mean, this workshop, to me, there's not many opportunities you would have to hear a world-class fire protection engineer, followed by an expert who sort of knows in granular detail what's happening at NIST, followed by the fire service. I mean, we have put together, I think, a really broad spectrum of the kind of expertise that's necessary to tackle the problems that we're looking at today in high rises. So it's an honor to be invited back to John Jay to participate in this. And we're going to have a free-flowing panel discussion now with Norm Groner, who's Emeritus Professor of John Jay, where he was in the Department of Security, Fire, and Emergency Management, and Jake Pauls, who Glenn usually refers to as the god of Egress. And I don't know if we need to go any further with introduction than that. You can read the bios as you wish, but our discussion have a conversation here about how buildings are used, egress issues, and we're not going to confine ourselves to fire. Because we're going to be talking about other human factors and other kinds of hazards that sort of play into this larger discussion of what the building can and can't do in terms of inhibiting or enabling us to escape and to be healthy and to be safe. So with that, I'm going to move over to the chair, and I'm going to pretty much just turn the switch and let you guys go. So.
Okay. You want to go ahead and give a few introductory remarks?
Yeah, I hope I'm not swallowing this mic. Does this sound about right for everybody? Okay. I'll try to assume the elbow's on table, radio mode. I haven't prepared very much for today, and perhaps that's a good thing, because usually I'm over-prepared. But what I thought I would do is share some experiences that I've had as a high-rise apartment dweller, both for my office and my home. And I live on the 22nd floor of a 24-story building in Toronto, Canada. The building is approximately 45, 50 years old. It's extremely well constructed. It does not have sprinklers. And the builders in Toronto have conspired to prevent almost all but the very newest buildings in Toronto from having sprinklers for decades. So I chose to live there for location, not because of its fire safety features. And you're not going to hear too many kind things about the building from me. Nor will you hear about state-of-the-art buildings like the World Trade Center, which may come up if somebody twists my arm.
I'm twisting, go ahead.
Okay, not right now, though. It just came up today, so I'm still digesting what I saw. I want to start out with a quote from Shakespeare, and this was written, "You've all heard, to be or not to be, that is the question," etc., whether it's nobler, etc., etc. And that was written about 400 years ago. I don't think he was thinking about high-rise, but I've sort of, what's the word you used for that? I've done something to Shakespeare.
Twisted. You twisted.
Oh, twisted it, yes, okay. I like that word, twisted. My old girlfriends call me twisted, too. But anyway, here's how I put it. To flee or not to flee, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler to follow the fire rules and quickly flee or to calmly assess risk, the odds clearly favor staying in one's place. And what sort of triggered that was an experience, about a year ago. It was about a little after 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm just refreshing my memory here. The fire alarm went off, and the fire alarm in my apartment building is, it's a loudspeaker within the apartment right next to the door, and it has a speaker about this large in it, and it can produce 110 dB very easily, which it did for approximately 12 minutes with a slow whoop. And those of you who are familiar with the slow whoop, it's a 3-second long signal, and it's very attention grabbing. It went off over 200 times before it stopped. I tried everything I could to suppress it by covering it with everything I had. I should have had a lead blanket or something, I guess. But what happened was it prevented all communication. You couldn't phone or anything. It was too loud. And I finally put on my noise-canceling headphones and then went out to the balcony. Fortunately, I could go out in the fresh air and watch the fire services. They were doing nothing. So I knew I was okay where I was. That was my information. My only source of information was visual from the street, some 60 meters below. And then finally it stopped, and after a minute or so, somebody came on the public address system, so the loudspeaker is now operating in an information mode with a real person at the other end, not a recording. And he basically said, there's been a false alarm, and we've basically turned off the system, and that was it. So I used that for a conference where I had invited a panel, including Norman. That was a few weeks ago in Cambridge, England. And I used that as an example of the whole purpose of the alarm was to do something about the time scale for an evacuation, to get people out quickly. And in this case, it drove you out of there because it was just so, I shouldn't say goddamn, but because if I'm that god, I can't do that. But anyway, it was really, really very, very annoying and deafening. It prevented communication, and it didn't cause a rapid egress. That's one of the first things I did was stick my head out in the corridor and just confirm that everybody else was staying put. So I use that as a sort of a jumping off point for a panel dealing with the relative merits of focusing more on information and perhaps less on time in responses, and particularly modeling for fire emergencies. Time has certainly been dealt with in great detail, not with great accuracy, I would say, but that's another talk. I think most of the panel agreed with me, and Norman can take issue with that. It's one of the first things I'm throwing his way as a controversial opinion on my part. We did hear a lot about time and information and how that's been dealt with by some very high-level people in the field, like Norman and Brian Meacham and Steve Gwynn and Ed Gallia and so forth. So we had some very high-level opinions on this. I think the bottom line of that was that information is very important. And that's really a segue to Norman, because he gave a paper there, I'm giving a pitch right now, a simple decision model for managing the movement of building occupants during fire emergencies. And I was struck by the clarity and relevance of that paper. Now, I don't say that too often, clarity and relevance. I'm not an academic, you know that already. And I'm not retired, I'm not a retired academic. Indeed, I'm not retired because I'm wearing a tie today, and I can't take my tie off because I'm not yet retired. I think I'm a little older than you, too. So.
Yeah, you got a few years on me, not much.
Yeah. Well, I'm in my 73rd year on the downhill side of that. So anyway, what Norman presented was a perfect response from an academic, and I wouldn't say this too often.
Bad academic.
Okay. Well, anyway, to my situation in my apartment building, because he basically said, and here I'm going to steal some of his thunder, well, he dealt with it in two ways, in terms of the design and the management of buildings. And I think I'm going to throw it over to Norman now, and I'm going to try to challenge him on some of the things that he wrote. Not very many, because I agree with almost everything in here, but it was that clarity of making people like myself who live in a high-rise building understand what the program is. When that alarm goes off, do I have to evacuate? And I won't tell you what they actually tell me in my building, but I'll wait for Norman to just give a bit more of the background on that clarity that we really need and we don't have.
Okay, well, it's hard for me and Jake to sit down here and talk like this as we have on many, many occasions, but this time we have to do it without a couple of pints of beer.
Oh, gee.
That makes it a little more difficult. Jake and I both come out of a human factors tradition, which involves the understanding of how you design physical systems generally so that they accommodate both the limitations and capabilities of actual human beings. And one of the things that people often say in human factors is that they distinguish between work as it is imagined and work as it really happens. The same can be applied to egress problems. In general, there's egress as the designers imagine it happens, and then egress as it really does happen. And they're two really different things. By designers, I mean fire protection engineers, architects, building developers, who often really drive the whole process. So egress happens in a way that designers often don't really understand. So in the course of my teaching, people here at John Jay College, including a lot of fire safety directors and firefighters, security professionals, that type of thing, I was trying to make sense of how people, managers in buildings, can actually reach sensible decisions about moving people in buildings in response to a variety of types of emergencies. And so I wanted a simple, intuitive mental model that they could remember easily without any real technical background. And it kind of boiled down to this. There's three decisions. First of all, you have to have a scenario in mind for a building. And the idea is you want to divide people up in the building because one size does not fit all. You want different people to do different kinds of things during an emergency. That process involves three basic decisions. Decision number one, which groups of people are safe where they are for the duration of the emergency? If they're safe where they already are, let them stay. Because it simplifies the management problem. If they're not going to be safe where they necessarily are, then you have to figure out where can they go where they'll be safer. That's the second decision, where are the safer places. And the third decision is how you're going to get them there, which is not just the means, not just the route to the safer location. It could be inside or outside of the building. But to the extent that people have limitations, you need to provide them with assistance. And I don't just mean disabilities, I mean familiarity with routes, guidance from staff. People need a variety of types of assistance. It's that last decision process which is probably the most difficult and most involved. So at any rate, the idea is you want people to people who manage the movement of people in buildings. And I say movement of buildings because it often does not involve a full building evacuation, but rather sometimes you want people to remain where they are. Sometimes you want them to relocate to other parts of the building. So at any rate, how that happens as you imagine, as a designer will imagine it happens, and how it really happens in the real world are two different things. There's a lot of examples. I just bring up a couple of them before I turn it back over to Jake. But one of them, because it's been alluded to before, is in high-rise residential buildings. So the question is, are people safer staying in their condos or apartments, or do you really want them to leave the building? Fire department would generally say, I'd like everybody to get out of the building if they could, because, well, it simplifies their work. And if you get out of the building, you're safe. But the problem with apartment buildings is people are asleep. You have poor communications. They don't understand what's going on necessarily. By the time they respond, there's a strong possibility that if the fire exceeds the compartment where it starts, that you're going to lose corridors and potentially stairs. So in high-rise residential buildings, a lot of people who die, apart from the people who die in the apartment where the fire started, are going to die in corridors or stairs, right? So maybe they should be better off staying where they are. How does that, but from a design standpoint, our designs for high-rise residential buildings are ambiguous. It's not clear what we really want people to do. So let me see, another thing I think is worth pointing out is that egress from a fire protection and engineer standpoint is a question of moving people as physical objects out of a building. But the real process of people egressing or moving around in a building is a social phenomenon. So people acquire information not just from alarm systems, they acquire a great deal of information from each other. So in the real world, people compare notes, they talk with each other, they try to understand trying to make sense of what are typically ambiguous cues. From a design standpoint, we don't try to help people make those decisions very well. So a lot of times people in buildings have a dearth of information. They don't have a clear understanding of what's going on. To the extent they get information, the information may be misleading. So from a design standpoint, we could do a lot more in providing information to people so that they can make more appropriate decisions in response to buildings. So I've got a bunch of other examples which may come up during the course of the conversation, but I'm hogging the microphone, so give it back to Jake.
I'm just going to throw a monkey wrench into this. The egress, if it occurred in my building, would be a social process, but one that that doesn't stop with people. It's a pet-friendly building. And there are approximately 400, 500, 600 people in the building. I don't know because I'm never there. And I suspect a few of them might be off in Florida or something as well. But it has a lot of pets. And the stairs are typical apartment stairs. They're not very human-friendly and even less pet-friendly. And so, but these people would be responding as a social unit, including pets. The pets are members of the family. And I've never faced this because since I travel so much, I don't have any pets. But I can imagine people in that situation a big part of their consideration about do I leave or not is, if I leave, do I take my pet with me, or do I stay with the pet? Because the pet's going to be very upset with not just the alarm going off, which is pretty bad, but also the very strange act of going down a stair with a lot of other people. And it's not very well designed for people, and it's even less well designed for dogs. I won't say about cats. There's a cat across the hall from me, and she spooked even when I come out my door, so I can imagine what that'd be like. So there's many complications in residential buildings. Now, we don't have to solve all those problems today because that's going to happen tomorrow and the next day. There we are, Jack. And yeah, we have 3 members of the high-rise Building Safety Advisory Committee, which is meeting tomorrow and the next day up till noon on Friday, to deal with residential emergency action plan guidelines. And it's going to be very interesting. It's probably going to be a little more rambunctious than this relatively friendly discussion we're having here, because I suspect Jack and I may think very differently about this. And my plea is that we have less organization than Jack would like to have. I'm sort of drawing you into this fight here. Yeah. And here's the problem. The building I'm in has 400 or 500 people. It does not have a resident manager. It used to have a resident manager. Our current fire instructions, which I did research for this occasion today, but I also read them when I moved in, says that if you have any question during an event, you should contact your resident manager. Well, there is no resident manager, and if there were, how would I do that with this damned alarm sounding so loud that I couldn't talk on a phone? You can see the problem. So yeah, I'm a great believer in social systems, but when you have a social system which doesn't include a resident manager, which is spelled out in the fire plan, what do? Because the response time for anybody to that building would be probably poorer than the fire services. We're talking maybe something on the order of 10, 12 minutes or so.
So when the alarm goes off, Jake, is there any announcement or it just does the whoop?
There was no announcement until 12 minutes in.
And like Norm said, it's all management and everything. Then why didn't they invest in an automatic alarm saying at this time we have an activated smoke detector on the 12th floor or something? Because you're relying on the fire department to get there and take over the mic and say what you said 10, 15 minutes later.
Yeah, well, I hate to say this, because I don't know if there's any fire services left in the room, but I would place more faith in a fire officer responding to the scene than a resident manager.
Yes, I do too. But if it was an automatic system, you would get information first. At least give you something. How many floors are your building?
As 24.
So at least some information that you can now work off of. No information is worse. You went outside and looked downstairs. They're not running around. I'm good.
Yeah, I just question, and I hate to sort of dwell on my particular apartment situation. I just have to live there. I'm not sure whether the information, whether given, presented live, or whether it's recorded, is going to help me very much. Remember, I'm a bit like Norman. I tend to think too much about things, and I wouldn't trust it whether it was live or recorded, because each of them might be irrelevant to the situation. And I would simply like to have a less upsetting and disruptive, alerting tone, which had meaning. In other words, there's a malfunction in the system and we're investigating it, and then have something more ear-piercing after that if there's smoke logging in some corridor somewhere. Anyway, so I've spoken enough now. I would, what's our time going like? Oh, we're okay. Everything that you're trying to do with, these action plans and everything that Norm is trying to do, but to be analytical about this and say that this clarity has to not just pervade the design process, which it clearly didn't in my apartment situation. It has to pervade the management process. In other words, there has to be clarity as to a group of people. I'm going to throw it back to you with this. You have to be able to find a group of people who are imperiled and a group of people who aren't imperiled. And you have to do that fairly quickly. So you set it up that way. So why don't you take the ball on that? How do you do that?
Well, you know the answer, and it's situation awareness. Easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
Because buildings are not designed to provide people with much information about what's going on in the building, which has been a theme, right? So if you design the building properly so that you can effectuate the way a way people movement should really happen, you'll have that information. Let's take the fire department response, even if they have the information, and they understand where the fire is and the extent to which the hazard is in the building, they don't have any way to talk to the occupants of the building either. Another major design flaw, because other than telephones and cell phones, there's, you know, from how's the fire department going to contact the people? And they're not going to have that information anyway. So other than going up in the building and banging on doors, they're pretty much, there's no options. You got a comment, Jim?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with the World Trade Center, so I wondered if anyone's done any analysis that if the people, I wonder if anyone's done analysis on the World Trade Center event, that if the people were told to evacuate, how many would have been saved?
Okay, so World Trade Center,
Right from the beginning. If they
yeah,
were told to
well,
evacuate, how many would have been saved?
it wouldn't have made a lot of difference because,
Are you giving me that answer off the top of your head?
no, I'm not. Because at the point of impact, we're not, okay, excluding public safety representatives who remained in the building above the area of impact, nearly, everybody died, right? Below the impact, the civilians generally were, well,
If you read the book
I,
by the New York Times,
there's a handful of people who might have been able to,
they said that a lot of people were going up to the roof, and they were the only ones going down.
That's right, so North Tower gets hit, it's the South Tower really is talking about. So let's ask the question now, if in fact the evacuation order had been given when the first plane hit.
oh, okay,
Tower,
well, okay,
if the
yes,
evacuation-
I agree with that.
I'm talking about people that were above the floor of the impact
Yes.
that walked out.
South Tower.
There's a few people, yeah, a handful, right?
Yes, but they insisted on themselves walking down, while
Yeah.
others went up, and others stayed in place. So if other people were told to leave immediately, even go past that fire floor, how many would have been saved? That's my question.
Well, I think that the analysis doesn't answer that question.
I'd like,
What do you mean, no one did an analysis?
I think that the information wasn't available to really get an accurate assessment, but we looked at it. It was examined in the,
There was a whole bridge.
you had to try to get some, there's one stairwell which was badly damaged, which remained somewhat intact, which a few people navigated.
But no one knows about the others because no one went down those.
True.
I'd like to jump in here if I could. We were just lucky on 9/11 that the buildings weren't fully occupied. Had they followed,
That's beside the point.
no, had the same process been followed with the fire department response and so forth, and we had a bigger load of people, it would have turned out much, much worse than what it was.
Had they insulated the structure, they wouldn't have fallen down. There's a lot of ifs. I mean, you guys are in the Egress area. There have been studies. This supposedly did a study. The UK did a multi-million-dollar study. What was learned from that building? In the 1993 bombing, it took people 12 hours to walk out.
Yeah, if I can jump in here, I worked in the towers in 1993. I worked in all the ones that collapsed, Building 7, 1, and 2. And I was also there during a meeting of the world's top security experts one evening in 1993, where they were discussing the growing threat of terrorism around the world. And in hindsight, of course, it's bizarre that they were sitting there in the very building that would be the subject of one of the worst terrorist attacks ever, and they didn't have there was no discussion of that. They were talking about airports and things like that.
No, but in 93, the building was bombed. And
Yes.
it took people a long time to walk out.
Yes, and the shame of 93 was that despite my personal efforts and others to try to get some research done of the evacuation, it was the largest evacuation of tall buildings ever.
The Japanese did research.
Well, there was only one study that interviewed people, and that was the study that my colleague Edwina Jouillet and did with the fire department. And they videotaped that, and then the fire department has sequestered the videotape ever since. So we didn't learn anything from that except for one article in Fire Engineering, which I guess Glenn was partly responsible for getting published. But everything else was based on the skimpiest of evidence.
What about 9/11? Norm?
Okay,
You
so,
interview people and the city won't release the interviews.
correct.
I mean,
Okay, so you're not gonna, I'm not gonna defend this, but, but
The
let me,
question is, why would they do that? They don't want to be sued?
well, I don't know, you have to talk to the attorneys, right? But I don't want to dwell on that. What I do want to mention, though, is personally, what I want to mention is the problem of generalizing from one incident to another. So that's a really important question. So the evacuations in the World Trade Center were relatively efficient. And based on NIST's investigation, one of the reasons they were relatively efficient was because the earlier bombing incident. So that at the very least
Evacuation on 9/11,
was
2001 was sufficient?
people, okay, listen, people below the impact area, civilians generally got out of the building. That's a lot of people. If the building had been more fully occupied, fewer people would have, wait a second, there's reason to believe that the 1993 bombing led to changes in the building, both organizationally and things, and in the building itself, and maybe Jake will want to address that, which probably led to a better evacuation on 9/11. So, okay, so you could argue with that, but there's evidence, anyway, okay, so, the
Okay.
point is that you try to generalize from one incident to another because you don't replicate the exact same incident again and again. So you learn what you can and you try to make changes.
Jake, I know you're going to talk next. Could I just say something? What about the announcements from the Port Authority telling people that everything's okay, they can go back? And there were people who went back up who after
Second
that
tower.
got killed. Yeah, so I'm saying, I think it was a catastrophe, and I don't think anyone knew what to do. But I'm not the expert. But go ahead, Jake. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't I helped get some of the funding, particularly for the first study from CDC, and well, Norm and I were both involved with that, and I was very disappointed with the two first studies, and I was happy with the third study. The problem was the third study came too late afterwards, but given the disadvantages of basically dealing with cold data, they did the best job of milking those data. But hopefully it won't happen again. But I visited the successor building today, and I just want to give you a bit of some of my responses to was a good job done. I was asked to write a paper after 1993 by Disaster Management, a journal, which I did, and I basically decried the lack of research and so forth. And I always remember my closing remarks and the conclusions. I asked, was it an expensive lesson? And I said, no, it was merely expensive. Very little was learned from 1993, and I felt really badly about this. Let's switch to the design of stairs in 1993. Clearly, it was abundantly clear that the stairs did not function the way they should have. They were stairs designed using technology from the 1940s, and I felt very badly that the defects of those stairs were not the ones that were fixed. They did some cosmetic stuff. They didn't fix the stairs in the way that they caused injuries in 1993. Handrails, for example, they were pathetic. Now, I visited World Trade Center 1 today, my first visit, and I got my head into two stairs. One, the fire department stair, which is not used by occupants. They stress that over and over again. No occupant will get in that stair. And the occupant stair. And what I saw were stairs, again, that were built to technology decades out of date. NFPA 101, for example, in 1981 specified improvements to the step geometry of stairs, which are not incorporated in World Trade Center 1. And I'll just tell you one statistic. The stairs that are in World Trade Center 1, by the research that was available around 2002, have a risk of falls on the stairs, just given their geometry, 2 to 2.5 times greater than if they met ICC or NFPA standards that date back to at least 1981 in the case of NFPA, and in the mid-'80s for the other model codes. I was appalled to see that. This is a world-class building. It's being hyped in many ways. But I was again seeing technology that I knew decades ago was not adequate. And it's really a shame. I'm going to be a little indignant about this, that New York City should know better. I can recall trying to get New York City to adopt the better requirements. This is after 9/11. And I just got this sense from this city, and I hate to do this. I'm a visitor here. I'll probably be ridden out of town and tarred and feathered, but you know, I get this attitude. We know how to do things, and don't give us any of that technology and research stuff, because we're going to do it our way. And they've done it again. But I would not feel very comfortable going down those stairs again with that risk ratio that they've achieved there. There were other aspects of it I didn't like, but it was really a downer going there today. Having said that, my own building, let's go back to my building, because, you know, I live in that building. I work there. I'm there many hours of the day, usually awake. And they replaced all the handrails, which is what they should have done in the World Trade Center. But when they replaced the handrails, they got them fabricated right, but they were installed wrong. So they have the same problem as the World Trade Center. The handrail gives false cues about where the bottom and top of the stairs are. So even in my little modest stairway in Toronto, built in 45, 50 years ago, even with their retrofit of the stair, which they spent a fortune on, they got it wrong. And I will be saying more about this topic in the next year or so internationally, particularly in Australia, about people like myself and Norman and others. I serve on 15 committees in the US and Canada, and I monitor 20. I am really getting really angry now that we really pour our best efforts of research into making codes and standards as good as they can be, based on the human factors, ergonomics, and fire incidents and everything else, everything we can draw upon. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to serve on committees like the one that a few of us will be at tomorrow over at the Grand Hyatt. But it really gets to me that with all this effort we have to try to improve the knowledge end of building design and management, the implementation sucks. That's a technical term, by the way. We use it in ergonomics quite a lot. I think I've been indignant enough now.
Okay.
I'll just finish, by the way. Most of my work's in the public health field these days. Fire is a very tiny part of my work. It constitutes less than 1% of injuries, by the way, fire. You're 50 times more likely to be injured on a stair than you are in a fire, and you're 10 times more likely to be injured in your bathroom than in a fire. And increasingly, fire services are responding to these injuries, and I will be putting a lot of pressure on the fire services in the future to be responsive to the prevention of those. NFPA is taking the lead on this, as some of you know, and has taken the lead on this for stairs for decades. And I just want to say that the stuff that Norman's been working on, again, the clarity, which I really applaud, of what should be done, what is the strategic thinking that should be going into development of the design of the facilities and its management, that's really good, but it's not getting out there. It's over to you.
That's my fault. I'm going to try to get it out there. I'm going to try to do better. So the thing that was amazing to me about developing this, as well as my situation awareness, information requirements analysis, was that these were sort of analytic tools that nobody had done yet. And it just kind of blew my mind. I've gone through the literature. I said, nobody's told how to think through people movement management decision making, and I couldn't find anywhere in the literature. I said, if it doesn't exist in the literature, I guess I'd better write it. So we're just getting started with this stuff. But let me, you brought up different kinds of hazards, so let me reflect on sort of an all-hazard perspective. Yep. Jake and I are on both the Life Safety Code Fundamentals Technical Committee. We're trying to push the idea of broadening the scope of the code to go beyond fire to a variety of different hazards, right? So tall buildings are particularly interesting. We're particularly interesting in terms of the Superstorm Sandy, right? So you've got this phenomenon where people say that. Well, I was at right after Katrina. I was at this meeting, right, and I'm on a panel with a councilman, and we're talking about Katrina and its implications for New York City. And I brought up, nobody else had brought it up, but I brought up the thought that, you know, we have high-rise buildings. People may not want to evacuate from their high-rise building during an emergency, even though they're instructed to do so. The councilman said, I don't think that would happen in New York. That's got to just be something that would happen in Louisiana, because New Yorkers, you know, are really compliant and passive in general. So, of course, Sandy comes along, and that's exactly what did happen. So the question is, on resilience and sustainability, you can probably be pretty sure that a lot of people are going to stay in the buildings if you have a storm surge, because they're not going to feel very threatened, because they're just going to say, well, we have a storm surge of 10 feet, and you're on the 6th floor. It's like, oh, that's not going to be a problem for me, but it will be a problem. So the question is, how to, assuming that a lot of people don't leave the building, how do we maintain resilience and sustainability? How do we maintain lifeline support for people? People with disabilities are stranded in these buildings because there's no elevator service, assuming that there's no backup power available. So there was during Sandy, a lot of emergent phenomenon where people organize themselves to bring groceries up to people who couldn't get down the stairs and that type of thing. So that's an interesting aspect of resilience, and for people occupy tall buildings, it goes well beyond the fire issue. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on the ergonomics and design areas. In my lifetime, I've seen immense changes in, for example, automobile design, roadway design. That's all happened in my lifetime, and a good part of it in my driving lifetime. Buses, trains, well, with the exception of the U.S. I'll leave the U.S. out of this. And Canada. Just tremendous improvements. Comfort, safety, efficiency, sustainable for the environment, everything. Buildings, nothing. We're still building buildings badly. We're designing them badly, and we're managing them badly, I think, too.
Can I just, this is the perfect kind of panel because I haven't had to intervene one time, but there's been a lot of slippery pronoun use here today. There's a lot of, you know, and you got right into this question of implementation. Part of what we're talking about today is where should political pressure be applied to actually locate responsibility in these situations. The locus of responsibility, from what you're talking about, it depends on what the case is. Is it the fire service? Is it the building manager? Is it the architect at some distant remove? Is it the code council? Is it the city public health department? The list could go on and on. Can you give us a sense of a best practice that may be out there already in terms of having a system where there's responsibility built into it so that you know who to go to design this kind of system, and then when it fails, to assess some sort of responsibility there? How do we locate it?
Yeah, well, the question you answered or asked a minute ago, the answer is no. I don't think there is a system that's working very well. And I will include the public health community in this as well. And I'm trying very hard to bring them into the building field and the regulatory field. That's most of my time these days, by the way, is just trying to educate public health officials that built environment is important. It's important for safety, it's important for livability, it's important for fitness and wellness and many other things, and we're not doing it. That connection between people as, you know, complex beings and buildings as complex structures and so on has not been made. And I'm hoping that the public health community understands this and starts becoming more proactive, because one thing the public health community does is they're not afraid to be indignant about something, like I am. It's a very famous public health leader basically said it very well. Bill Foege, former head of CDC and a bunch of other stuff, now with the Gates Fund or Foundation. He said, our job in public health is to be indignant on behalf of everyone else. And I don't see much indignation generally shared in what we're talking about. For example, in the recent tenants meeting at my apartment building, I keep relating to that, it's real world. Once a year we have this, or tenants association has to have a meeting by law. And lots of discussions about the laundry not working too well, nothing about safety. The word safety wasn't mentioned until a lady who was sitting with her arm in a cast, like Sally there, a little worse than Sally's situation. She had banged up her shoulder. She had fallen in one of the areas in the facility. But the, so that there's problems that I think with every organization or every aspect of this. We really haven't dealt with the issue of safety very well. We haven't dealt with it comprehensively. And that's my plea, essentially. And I think, Norman, you sort of didn't explore that issue of the multi-hazard. I'm totally in favor of codes and standards taking a multi-hazard approach. And fire is going to get less attention in that approach. We have to deal with things like Sandy and other things like that much better than we have in terms of building design.
Well, our fire record is improving. So as it improves, it gets somewhat less attention. So we are reactive, you know. So you need to kill a lot of people in a single incident, and then people start paying a lot of attention. You got to jump on those events, and you got to really push the change when that happens, and be prepared to really advocate for the change, because that's when you get people's attention. People die in 1s, 2s, and 3s. People don't pay much attention to it, to be honest. The other thing is that the whole process needs to be reformed. So Jose was talking about this morning that fire protection engineers are brought in at the end of projects to try to figure out how can I make the building relatively safe, but without messing with the grand vision of architects. So you need to have some sort of parity between people, safety professionals, and the people and the people who are in the creative design business, I guess. They need the status of the people should be equal, and I guess that requires some regulatory reform, and it requires authorities having jurisdiction, being better educated, and pushing harder for peer reviews that are sensible and just try to clean the whole process up a bit.
So we have 5 minutes left in this session. Let's open the floor. Jim, you've got the...
I have a comment. I don't think you'll find the indignation among, I don't know. I don't think you find the indignation among the general public that would improve fire safety. If you heard Jose's talk, that vision comes from a deep study of the fire issues and from a standpoint of the field in scientific terms to the regulation process and how things happen. In the regulation process, it's controlled by special interests. You can say NFPA and other organizations allow anyone to come, but if you can't afford it or don't have the knowledge, you're not going. I mean, you're just not going. So there's no objective force in investigating what Jose said. And how you would get the leverage politically, it has to come from a government source. No city is going to take that on itself because they just don't have the resources, so it has to come from the federal government. And the fire service has to articulate that. So the fire service has to become sensitive, and I think slowly they are. They have to become sensitive to the responsibility that prevention is part of their job. Now, I wish there were still fire service people in the audience. If there are, I would like to hear from them.
One here, and then we'll go back here.
Okay, I'm going to make it quick. Oh, there's a fire service here.
Yeah, I'm a member of the FDNY, and fire prevention has definitely taken a step majorly in the last 20 years in the right direction as far as prevention. So I think we're heading in that right direction with that.
Yeah, but you don't advocate on a national level for the things, if you heard Jose's talk, you don't advocate on what is missing from fire safety design buildings.
Yes, you're probably right on that. That's above my pay grade. But I mean, as far as citywide, fire prevention has definitely, it's extremely increased.
It's not like you're bad, you're going to fire prevention. Now,
Right, and even daily in the firehouse, when they go out for inspections, the forms that they're filling out are night and day.
Those forms are tied to the regulation. They're not tied to the knowledge of, hey, that thing up there in this building is going to cause a problem because I understand the science of fire. I understand the interaction of fire with structures. The fire department doesn't have that knowledge.
The knowledge we have as far as past fires and stuff like that, guys lean on. And as far as national, I really couldn't answer for that. But
Quick comment to Jake. So as an architect who's learning emergency management, personally, I really want to know point blank from your comment, Freedom Towers, all the safety features that you have very concerns of. So offline, so I really want to know point by blank because I will call the actual architects and the person who draw and did all the safety checks and everything and point out to them. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to refer your architects to what I've done, just Google my name with the word stairs behind it. It'll go to my website, and there's all kinds of videos they can watch for free. And I don't think architects are very interested in that kind of thing. This goes to a broader question about architects need to have education, not just in all the things they now are educated in. And it's a tough education in terms of putting everything in there. But they really have to have a better education in ergonomics and in public health, because architects are registered because of their duties under public health law. And very few architects appreciate that. The only reason they have that privileged status is they have a duty to public health. And if you ask most architects to say, what have you done about that duty, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. But I can certainly tell them. Sally.
Yes, I just want to make 2 comments before I make another comment. So I wanted to say, I have to say in defense of architects, there are architects here in New York who have made themselves available to us and myself regarding their sensitivity. They really would like to know how to build a safe building. The thing is, you can have an architect who wants to build a safe building, but then you have the builders, the developers, and it's all about money. So, safety costs money, so you do have that. There's a department in, Pratt Institute, and these architects have a course in how to design safe buildings. So I think it's something that's exists, but there are terrible social factors preventing architects who want to build safe buildings from being able to do so. And the other thing is, I'm so glad that we have the participation of the fire department. And yes, there's a long way to go, but it's people from the fire service who attend our seminars. And I think, at least they can bring the information back. And look, it's a slow and laborious, way to do things, but I think it's great. So please come back, John, keep coming back, and bring the information back. Now, Jake, as the Stair King, I wanted to just make one comment. You said you saw, you were in #1 World Trade Center. I'd like to know if you're aware that #1 World Trade Center, that's a Port Authority building. And I know you mentioned the city of New York. The Port Authority, as I said before, is exempt and immune from all New York City building and fire codes. Now, I know that the chief who was here, he said, oh, they far exceed, they're very good. However, they're not under the legal jurisdiction of the New York City, of anything in New York City. The Port Authority can do what they want to do. So you mentioned, Jake, about the stairs and so on. That's a Port Authority building. And they do, and they continue to do whatever they want to do. Now, even though they claim we not only meet, but we far exceed New York City building and fire codes. But anyway, I want to ask you, Jake, have you ever been in one of Larry Silverstein's building, for example, #7 World Trade Center? And I'd love you to go there, and or we could take you there at some point. And I'd like you to compare. I'm wondering, is it really much better than the Port Authority buildings? To me, just as a novice, I'm not a stair expert. I've been there. He does have great it's overbuilt, and he did that, and he has a relation with the fire department or something. And I believe Glenn, where's Glenn? Is he here? Yeah. Glenn, is Larry Silverstein's building, are they under the jurisdiction of New York City?
Yes.
Okay.
And he's doing 3 or 4 right now.
And, okay. Okay, and I'm just going to give it back to Jake to answer about Larry Silverstein's building versus.
I don't know. I saw Larry just 2 days ago because he was speaking at this conference, and he's an interesting guy.
He is very interesting.
Yeah, and I like that quality about him.
Yeah.
He was the sort of the word of experience and what's the word? Sage. What's the adjective for that? Anyway, it's one of these $10 words. Yes. So I really don't know. I was hoping to, in my increasingly infrequent trips to New York, to at least drop by the Building 7 a long, long time ago. I really wanted to do that, and it didn't work out. I've only seen it on video on Nova, so I don't know. That's all I can say about it. I would love to assist these folks and basically say, let's stop building these buildings with old technology, where the human factors have not been taken into account. And let me just finish on this point. One of the things that is really driving public health these days, by the way, in public health, we would not be sitting for all this time. We would be standing, because sitting is the new smoking. That's the buzzword. And
I thought bacon was the new smoking. Now I have to worry about sitting while I'm eating bacon. This is
yeah. Well, and groups like CDC and public health groups around the world are basically saying we've got to get people more active. And everything I'm seeing in both the design of buildings and the design of furnishings in buildings, so I just finished 2 international conferences on ergonomics, is not addressing that. I don't see any response on that issue. And this is another kind of public health issue, and it's a very rapidly growing one: diabetes, weight gain, lack of fitness, and all of this relates to evacuation, because those people cannot evacuate a building like I can. Let me just finish with this statistic. I can evacuate my building in 3 minutes and 3.5 minutes without any dogs or other people in the stair. I have no problem doing that, but I would suspect, because 22nd, I used to be able to do it much faster than that, but 3.5 minutes isn't bad. We really have to design buildings for activity, and these stairs, by the way, were never designed to be attractive for any use, whether it's an emergency or a non-emergency event. Whereas everything we're learning about from public health is we've got to make people be able to move through the building, be active, use the stairs, because the stairs are great for aerobic exercise and coordination and everything else. And we're losing all that. Every time I see a building which basically has the stairs locked away, I know we've missed a huge public health benefit of those stairs. And sorry, that was another aside. I'm just trying to bring all these things together. We haven't taken a holistic view to buildings in which what we do for fire safety, egress, and so on is part of a larger palette of public health concerns. We haven't done that.
So let's thank Jake and Norm. Oh.
Because we're going to go on to the general panel here in a second.
Right.
Jake, we just spend 2 minutes on sort of your own history on research, particularly stairs. What the codes, you just took a chunk of it right now with the issue of health factors and things like that. But I think what's another one that's really important, one thinks about it, of course, is egress, ascending stairs as opposed to descending stairs. So would you kind of just, for 2 minutes, tell us about your concerns about subterranean train terminals and things like that?
How about museums? How about subterranean museums at the World Trade Center?
Yeah, well,
8 stories below ground.
yeah, we're finally getting papers at international conferences like the one Norman and I were at a few weeks back, which address ascent. I hope they do a better job than we've done with descent. And let me just finish on another statistic. During my lifetime, people's performance with stairs has deteriorated by a factor of 2 or 3. And so this affects all that modeling and time predictions that are made. We have to understand, if we're going to have a life safety system based on egress, whether it's partial or total, or whether it's up or down, we have to have a better sense of how to really facilitate that process because the population is changing. People are very different now than they were when I grew up. I mean, there would be about half the weight in this room if this was a meeting back in 1980. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, you do look pretty slim there, don't you? Okay, you're okay. But I think that this is one thing the fire protection community and the fire services has to understand, that we're dealing with a different population, and it's going to change even more in the future, where things are not going to be as efficient, and life safety will be affected by that. And so things like non-egress as a strategy will have to be dealt with a little more carefully and seriously as a strategy. And I'll end on that. I think we've come full circle. I think we go back to Shakespeare, to flee or not to flee, that is the question.